She won her first ever WTA title just 3 days ago. Right now, medical staff are jogging onto center court in Toronto to check her leg. That is not how championship stories are supposed to unfold. Alex Eala is standing at the baseline, favoring her right foot. And the crowd, this loud, electric, flag-waving crowd, goes completely silent. Thousands of fans flew in for this. They painted their faces with the Philippine flag. Some of them waited outside the stadium gates for hours just to get a good seat. And all of them go quiet at the exact same second. Then something happens that nobody in that building saw coming. The trainer wraps her ankle. She nods once. She walks back to the line like absolutely nothing happened. And 30 seconds later, 12,000 people in Toronto are on their feet, screaming like they just watched a knockout punch land. So here's the question nobody has really answered yet. Why does an injury timeout, something that usually deflates a crowd and drains the energy out of a stadium, turn into the loudest moment of the entire tournament instead? Why does watching someone look vulnerable make people love her more, not less? Something happened in that second set that most highlight reels are going to skip right past. Something that explains why a 21-year-old from the Philippines now has grown men. Guys who have covered professional tennis for 20 years, comparing her to Serena Williams, we are going to walk through exactly what happened, piece by piece. The set she almost let slip through her fingers, the moment her own body turned on her mid-match, and the choice she made in the space of about 4 seconds, a choice that turned what looked like a total collapse into the loudest ovation of the week. By the time this video is over, you are going to understand something about Alex Eala that most casual tennis fans still do not know, and it has nothing to do with her forehand. But first, rewind with me. 72 hours before that, trainer sprinted onto the court in Toronto because what happened in Washington explains everything that came after. Alex Eala was standing on a podium in Washington, D.C., holding a trophy she had never held before. She had just done something no Filipino tennis player, man or woman, had ever done in the history of the sport. She won a WTA Tour singles title, her first one ever. And she did not back into it either. She was down a set to Jessica Pegula, an American ranked inside the world's top 30, and she came storming back to close it out 6-0 in the third set. 6-0 against a player who had already dismantled some of the best returners on tour that same week. Sit with that number for a second. Pegula did not just lose that set. She got shut out completely. For a 21-year-old who left home as a kid to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain, thousands of miles from everything familiar, this was the moment. The one every young athlete dreams about but almost never actually gets to live. A maiden title, won on American soil, against an American opponent, in front of a crowd that had shown up specifically to watch her. And here is where the story starts to get complicated. Most players who win their very first tour title take time off after. They celebrate, they rest, their bodies scream for it, and honestly, their minds need it even more. Because winning a title is not just physically draining, it is emotionally draining in a way most people never experience in their entire lives. Eala did not get any of that time. 48 hours after lifting that trophy, she was already on a plane to Toronto. 48 hours. She landed, unpacked her bags, and walked straight into one of the biggest events on the entire WTA calendar against a field packed with dangerous players who were rested and hungry. And somehow, she kept winning. 6 matches in a row now on hard courts across North America. If you count everything since Washington, 6 straight wins with almost no real recovery window squeezed in between them. Here is why that number should worry you a little. In tennis, fatigue rarely shows up as heavy legs or obvious exhaustion. It shows up as tiny breakdowns, a step that is a half-second late, a reaction that is just slightly delayed, the kind of small cracks that mean nothing against a weaker opponent but become absolutely fatal against someone dangerous. And her opponent in that third round was not some easy walkover. Caty McNally had just pulled off something remarkable of her own. 2 rounds earlier, she took down Linda Noskova, the reigning Wimbledon champion, in straight sets. A giant slayer walking into this match fresh, hungry, and with absolutely nothing left to lose. So picture the setup. On one side of the net, a 24-year-old American who just knocked out a Grand Slam champion and has nothing left to prove this week. On the other side, a 21-year-old running on fumes, playing her 7th match in barely a week, Still riding the emotional high of the biggest win of her career, but dragging a body that has not had a single full day to reset. This is the part of the story that usually gets glossed over in the recaps. Everybody wants to talk about the trophy. Nobody wants to talk about the bill that quietly comes due right after. If you have ever pushed yourself right to the edge immediately after a huge win, you already know exactly what I am describing. That strange cocktail of adrenaline and exhaustion where your mind keeps saying, keep going, while your body is quietly flashing warning signs you have decided to ignore. That is precisely where Alex Eala was standing when she walked out onto center court to face McNally. And if you actually want to understand what happened next, instead of just watching a 30-second highlight clip stripped of all its context, stay with me, because the next few minutes explain exactly how this became the moment everyone is suddenly talking about. The warning signs started almost immediately, and at first, they looked like absolutely nothing at all. On paper, that first set looked completely ordinary. Eala dropped serve in her first 2 service games, down 1 game to 3 early against an opponent who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. If you were just glancing at the score on your phone, you would have assumed this was simply a slow start. Athletes have slow starts constantly. It happens after long travel, after emotional highs, after a body needs a few minutes to remember what real competition feels like. Here is the first question worth sitting with. Was this actually just a slow start? Or was it the very first crack? Because what happened next did not look anything like fatigue. Eala reeled off 5 straight games, 5 in a row, climbing out of a 2-game hole to close the set 6 games to 3. She did not just recover, she dominated. No hesitation, no visible strain, nothing that looked like a body running on empty. If you had turned the broadcast off right there, you would have walked away thinking this was just one more routine win inside an incredible 6-match streak. But tennis does not care about the story you have already written in your head. Tennis has a brutal habit of making you pay for things later. The second set is exactly where this match stopped being routine. Both players traded breaks of serve over and over, neither one able to hang on to a comfortable lead. This is the kind of set that wears you down in ways that never show up on a stat sheet. Every single game starts to feel like its own tiny crisis. Every service game turns into a fight just to survive to the next point. And then it happened. Eala found herself serving at 5 games to 4. 1 game away from closing out the match in straight sets. 1 game away from stretching the streak to 7 wins in a row. A match point sitting right there on her own racket. Here is the second question, and this is the one that should genuinely bother you. Why does a player who just spent 5 straight games completely dismantling her opponent suddenly lose her grip at the exact moment she is closest to finishing the job? She did not close it out. McNally broke back, then held, then broke again. 7 games to 5. The set that should have ended the match instead forced a 3rd set decider. If you have ever watched an athlete on the verge of victory suddenly come apart in front of you, you already know that specific sinking feeling in your stomach. The sense that something is wrong beneath the surface, something that has absolutely nothing to do with skill. And then came the detail that changes everything about how you should be reading this entire match. Right in the middle of that same second set, Eala asked the umpire to check her right foot. The tape wrapped around it needed to come off. Right there, mid-match, in front of a stadium full of people who had shown up specifically because they believed she was unstoppable. This is not a coincidence. Walk through the timeline with me one more time. A dominant first set, a blown match point, a physical issue surfacing at almost the exact same moment as the mental letdown. These are not 3 separate stories happening to overlap. They are the same story told from 3 different angles. By the time that 3rd set decider began, the question hanging over center court was no longer whether Alex Eala was going to win this match. The real question was whether her body was even going to let her finish it. Here's what almost every single recap of this match got completely wrong. They framed the injury as the problem, the obstacle, the thing standing between Alex Eala and victory. A body breaking down at the worst possible moment, forcing a champion to grit her teeth and fight through pain just to survive. That framing has it backwards. The injury was not the story. The injury was simply the thing that finally let everyone see the real story, one that had actually been sitting in plain sight for weeks while nobody bothered to connect the dots. Think about what genuinely happened inside that stadium. The crowd did not erupt because Eala hit some clean, effortless winner. They did not erupt over a perfect ace or a highlight reel forehand. They erupted after watching her get physically compromised, watch a match point slip through her fingers, get her foot retaped in front of thousands of strangers, and then walk right back to the baseline like none of it had happened at all. That is not what people cheer for when they are simply watching a tennis match. That is what people cheer for when they are watching someone flatly refuse to lose to their own body. So here is the real reframe. This was never a story about an injury threatening a win. This was a story about a competitor discovering live, in real time, in front of a packed crowd, exactly how much she could take. Think about boxing for a second. Nobody remembers the fighter who wins by knockout in round 1. The fights people still talk about decades later are the ones where somebody got dropped, got hurt, and still found a way to climb back up off the canvas. The knockdown is never the moment that gets erased from the story. The knockdown is the moment that makes the story worth telling in the first place. That is exactly what unfolded on that court. The moment the tape came off her foot was not a low point in this match. It was the actual turning point of the entire narrative, even if nobody inside that building fully understood it yet. And here is the part that should genuinely catch you off guard. This was not the first time Alex Eala has done this. Go back to that final in Washington. Down a set to Jessica Pegula, a top 30 opponent, on foreign soil, carrying the weight of an entire nation that had never once seen anything like this before. She did not fold under it. She won 12 of the final 14 games of that entire match. She shut out one of the best American players in the country on the single biggest stage of her career. Now look back at Toronto. A blown match point, a physical breakdown happening in real time, a third-set decider against a player who had already proven she could take down a Wimbledon champion. Same pattern, different match, different opponent, same result. This is not luck. Luck does not repeat itself under completely different circumstances with completely different stakes. What you are actually looking at here is a pattern. And once you see a pattern twice, it stops being a coincidence and starts becoming a signature. I want to know if you caught this before I said it out loud. Did you notice the parallel between Washington and Toronto while you were watching it live? Or is this the first time anyone has actually connected those two moments for you? Drop it in the comments, because what you say there genuinely changes how I frame the next video in this series. And if you think this reframe is a stretch, if you think I am reading too much into one injury timeout, stay with me. What happened in that third set is not going to leave you with a shred of doubt. Let's start with the simplest piece of evidence there is, the scoreboard. Eala did not just survive that third set. She won it. After blowing a match point, after getting her foot retaped in front of a stadium full of people quietly wondering if she could even continue, she walked back onto that court and closed out the match anyway. Think about the psychology packed into that moment. In tennis, blowing a match point is one of the most mentally brutal things that can happen to a competitor. The finish line was right there, you touched it, and then it vanished. Most players carry that failure straight into the next set. It lingered. It creeps into their footwork, their serve toss, their decision-making on the biggest points. Eala did not carry it anywhere. She reset completely, and she closed out the biggest match of her tournament with a body that was clearly not fully cooperating. That is not talent. Talent gets you to 5 games to 4 in the first place. What carries you through the collapse afterward is something else entirely, and it is a whole lot rarer. Here is the second piece of evidence, and this one does not come from a highlight reel at all. It comes from a voice in this sport that does not throw around comparisons lightly. Greg Rusedski, a former top 10 player who has watched tennis at the highest level for decades, was asked about Eala's rise. He did not talk about her forehand, he did not talk about her serve. He said he can only compare what she is doing to one single player, Serena Williams. Sit with that comparison for a second. Not Serena's game, not her technique, her impact, the way a crowd's energy shifts the second she walks onto a court, the way opponents can feel the atmosphere change before a single point has even been played. That is an extraordinarily rare comparison for a former professional to make, and it is not the kind of thing you say lightly just because someone happened to have one good week. Here is the third piece of evidence, and this is the one that pulls everything together. This win over McNally was Eala's third straight victory over an American opponent on North American soil. 3 different players, 3 completely different styles, 3 different pressure situations. And in every single one, she found a way to be at her calmest exactly when the stakes were at their highest. So go back to the question we opened this video with. Why did 12,000 people in Toronto erupt over an injury timeout instead of falling silent with concern? Now you have the answer. They were not reacting to one isolated moment. They were reacting to a pattern they had already started to recognize, even if none of them could have put it into words in the moment. Somewhere in the back of that crowd's collective instinct was the sense that they were not simply watching someone play hurt. They were watching someone who does her very best work exactly when everything else starts falling apart. And here is something most people watching from home completely missed. Opposing players have started saying this openly in their own press conferences, not commentators, not analysts. The women who actually have to stand across the net from her. When your rivals start talking about your mentality more than they talk about your ground strokes, that tells you something the scoreboard never will. So the question is no longer whether Alex Eala is going to be fine after this injury scare. The evidence already answered that one for us. The real question now is how far this pattern is going to take her and whether the rest of the tour is even ready for what happens once the stakes climb higher than this. So let's finally answer the question we opened with. Was the injury actually serious? According to everyone around her team, no. It was not the kind of thing that threatens a career, or even threatens the rest of this tournament. But here is what matters far more than any medical report. That moment did something else entirely. It became the moment American tennis fans stopped seeing Alex Eala as just another rising name on the WTA calendar and started seeing her as someone who competes differently than almost anybody else on tour right now. That is the real headline here. Not the tape on her foot. What that tape revealed. Now, think about what comes next. Eala moves on to the fourth round in Toronto, and she moves on with a body that has not had a single full day of rest since she was standing on that podium in Washington. 7 matches deep. No real recovery window. And the players waiting for her in the draw are not going to make any of this easy. So here is the real question going forward. Does a body push this far eventually catch up with her? Or does this simply become one more chapter in a pattern we have now watched twice in 2 different cities under 2 completely different kinds of pressure? I honestly do not think we know the answer yet. I think Toronto is about to tell us. What I do know is this. Every single time this player has been pushed to the edge this year, she has found something extra exactly when she needed it most. Washington proved it once. Toronto just proved it again. And if that pattern holds a third time, we are not just watching a good tournament anymore. We are watching the early chapters of something much bigger. If you want to know what happens next, and whether this pattern holds when the pressure climbs even higher than this, subscribe now. I am going to be tracking every single round of this run, and you do not want to find out what happens next from some headline. You want to watch it unfold in real time, the exact same way we just did.